Was the resurrection faked? And who the hell ever says that it is? This is just an apologist running around with the goalposts because what the hell else is he supposed to do? Present evidence? Prove that any of the things in his head ever really happened? Yeah, sure he'll do that. Because that's what he actually needs to do if any of that is actually valid, and he expects us to take him seriously, but, he can't do that because it's not. So let's go watch him fail, because that's all these people ever do. So today we're going to go after yet another J. Warner Wallace video, and I know, why in the world would I go after someone that I respect so little? Well, truth be told, I don't respect any theists, so if I did that, I'd never make another video again. This time, he's going to run around with a straw man like that's anything new, and just assume that because he really likes his beliefs, they automatically have to be true. Now, we notice that happens an awful lot with the religious, don't we? So, be ready for that. It's just not going to go well for him, I'll tell you that right up front. So, let's get started.
You're in a conversation and someone says, Jesus didn't actually rise from the dead, the resurrection story was faked. What would you say?
Well, first I'd ask you what you mean by faked. Because a lot of these conversations rise or fall on the terminology that you use and the meanings that you intend. It's why I always try to define my terms up front, and the religious, well, they usually don't. Just saying. I think it's why so many discussions fall apart, because people, not just the religious and the irreligious, but lots and lots of discussions, they fail because the participants are talking directly past each other. They're not actually talking to each other, they're both just going wherever they're going. So I'm going to look at this video as I'd address any other video and tell you what I think of the question. I don't say that the resurrection was faked. I just don't think it ever happened at all. So we'll see what comes next.
In the modern era of science and technology, ancient claims involving supernatural, miraculous events can seem a lot more like mythology than history.
That's because every single one of them that we've ever examined turned out to be mythology. There isn't a single supernatural claim anywhere, ever, that has ever turned out to be demonstrably so. Therefore, there's no reason to take any of those supernatural claims seriously because they have never objectively happened ever. Now, if you can prove that yours did, and that requires evidence, that's another thing that we can address separately. But so far, you got nothing. The believers, and remember, I'm including all the people who believe in supernatural things, ghosts, goblins, you name it. Those are people with the burden of proof here, and to date, absolutely none of them have ever met it. You've got to get to work, and I'm not holding my breath that you will. You've got a lot to do to prove your point. Go ahead.
When an author from antiquity writes about a miraculous experience or observation, we usually assume they're naive, mistaken, delusional, or lying.
And you notice which of those he's going to focus on in this video, right? Because we know that all of those things do demonstrably happen. People do make mistakes. People are delusional. People are naive, and they do attach emotionally comforting conclusions to events without any kind of objective corroboration. And yes, people do lie. Now, just based on the title of his video, I'm assuming that he's going to try to funnel absolutely everything down that path without ever addressing any of the others. So we'll see if I'm right, but it's probably a safe bet. I wouldn't trust Wallace farther than I could throw him. And I don't think I can throw him that far.
Many ancient biblical authors seem to see and experience the risen Jesus. And it's difficult to explain these varied group experiences as simultaneous delusions or coincidental errors.
actually, if you look at the Bible and understand how it was written, neither of those was at all necessary. We know that the Gospels were written anonymously. We have no clue at all who actually wrote them, although I'm sure Wallace is in the camp that thinks that the names that Papias stapled onto them are somehow the actual truth, and that the actual disciples wrote these things, which is total nonsense. But we have got absolutely no evidence whatsoever that supports that conclusion. Church tradition simply isn't impressive. We simply have 4 accounts that were written at the earliest decades after the events, if the events ever happened at all, and we know that they all copy heavily from earlier accounts. Now, keep in mind that these stories had circulated far and wide by word of mouth for many, many years, and we all know how unreliable that kind of game of telephone actually is. Plus the fact that the earliest Christians, mostly they were converted Jews who, according to the Jewish scriptures, they'd been waiting for a Messiah for many, many, many years. And that's why so many of the stories in the Old Testament suddenly show up fulfilled in the New Testament, because that's what they expected. We have no demonstrable eyewitnesses to anything that supposedly happened. Why should we believe in any of those stories at all?
Maybe that's why so many skeptics think the disciples of Jesus were simply lying, telling a fake story about the resurrection.
Such as, citation needed, because I think he'll have a hard time coming up with demonstrable examples of skeptics that actually say what he claims they say. Because if we want to be really clear about this, and we do, we need to look at his preconceptions, not ours. All we're saying is that he hasn't proven his case. He's starting off with the assumption, unproven and honestly unprovable, that the gospel accounts were actually written by the disciples of Jesus. Really? Prove it. That is a faith statement, not one supported by evidence, and as we go on, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I don't care about your beliefs. I care about the proof that you can offer that your beliefs are factually correct. So, Wallace, you gotta get to work.
But if there's one thing I've learned as a homicide detective, conspiracies of this nature, if they are to be successful, rely on key characteristics and conditions, and none of these critical attributes were present for the disciples of Jesus.
And there he goes again. You can't even prove that the disciples of Jesus ever existed. Hell, you can't even prove that Jesus ever existed. These are stories told in a book of mythology and absolutely nothing more. At least there's nothing more until you can provide direct, objectively verifiable, corroboratory evidence that they did. And good luck on that. Because this is where you really need to be able to step back, set aside your preconceptions, and just go on the evidence that we actually have at hand. And Wallace can't do that. And it's one of the many reasons that he's such a joke.
So the next time someone says, the story of Jesus' resurrection was faked, here are 3 things to remember. Number 1. The story involved too many people and too much time to be faked. Successful conspiracies require the smallest possible number of co-conspirators circulating the lie for the shortest period of time.
So now this has gone from a lie, which again, nobody that I know of actually says, to some grand conspiracy. That's some nice running around with the goalpost there, Wallace. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It doesn't even have to be a lie. They could have believed absolutely every word of it and still been wrong. But of course, he's still pretending that if he does away with this objection, just waves it away with his hands without actually providing any evidence, that all of the others will just vanish magically into the ether too. And that's not how any of this works. I'd ask when he planned to getting around to the others, but I think we all know that he's not going to, because this is just a scam. If anyone here is a liar, it's J. Warner Wallace. Or maybe he's just a dumbass. I don't know. You decide.
It's a lot easier for 2 people to tell a lie and keep a secret than it is for 20 to.
Well, we can play along if you'd like, because this whole thing holds absolutely no water regardless. Even if we do assume that this started off as some kind of a grand conspiracy among the apostles, that doesn't mean that anyone else had to do anything else but believe it. If 2 people say something and others just happen to believe what they say, then it's not a lie on the part of the believers. They've just been misled. So if we grant that the gospel writers were indeed Jesus' apostles, and of course we can't prove that, but we'll pretend, and we also grant that Paul didn't just have a drug trip on the road to Damascus and was actually trying to force his own religious ideas into the then popular cult, that's only 5 people that had to maintain the lie and preach it across the ancient Mediterranean. And that's really not that hard to believe.
It's also a lot easier to tell a lie and keep a secret for a day than it is for a year. There were simply too many eyewitnesses of the risen Christ. Luke identifies 120 in Acts.
Luke claims that there were 120 in Acts. That's a claim. That's not evidence. We don't have any independent attestations from any of those supposed eyewitnesses. I mean, I can write a book that claims that I just flapped my arms and flew around the city today and millions of people saw me. That doesn't make it true, and it doesn't mean that there were any actual eyewitnesses. Produce those independent accounts of the people that Luke claimed saw Jesus, and let's compare them, because I'm willing to bet that he can't.
And Paul identifies over 500 in 1 Corinthians.
And that's just another claim. What were the names of those 500 supposed eyewitnesses? What were the names of any of them? Where are their accounts? How do we verify that there actually were these people that were claimed to have seen Jesus? Because this is something that the religious love to pull. The idea that, at the time, skeptics could have gone out and asked these eyewitnesses. Yeah, how would they have done that exactly? How do you do that when none of them are actually identified? This is just an empty claim made in a book of mythology with absolutely zero corroboration whatsoever. And I don't know why they think this is impressive, because it absolutely is not. Right now, how many demonstrable eyewitnesses do we have to the story of Jesus? 0. Absolutely 0. Just because Wallace here really wants it to be true, he can't prove a damn thing, and it's the proof that actually matters.
In addition, these witnesses faithfully communicated what they saw for nearly 60 years without flinching or changing their story.
And how the hell do you know that? Because so far, you haven't proven that there were any eyewitnesses whatsoever. It's like walking into a courtroom and saying, "Your Honor, 45 people saw the defendant commit their crime, but we can't actually produce any of them. We don't have any way to validate the testimony, and we can't even prove that the things that I've said are even true." Well, that's not impressive. It's probably going to get your ass not only thrown out by the judge, and rightfully so, but probably thrown in jail as well for contempt of court. Because we know that there were stories running around for a while. We just don't know for certain how long, because we don't have any written records of these ancient games of telephone. We just have oral traditions by the faithful and the blind faith of the gullible. And that's just not enough. It's why people like Wallace aren't making these videos for people like me, for people that are skeptical. If he had anything of value, he wouldn't be putting up his videos on YouTube. He'd be up in front of a group of secular historians proving his point. But he's not doing that, is he? Absolutely none of them are.
If the story of Jesus was faked, it would have been exposed easily given the number of people making the claims for nearly 6 decades.
And exactly how do you know that? Not why do you believe it, but how do you actually prove it? Now, there were certainly people who believed the tales of Jesus. I think that much is clear. But there are plenty of people back in the 1400s that believed the stories that Muhammad told, and that doesn't make any of that true either. This is where Wallace is allowing his blind faith to run completely away with him. I don't care about your faith. You have to do a whole lot better than that, and I think we all know that he can't. But anyway, let's continue.
Number 2. The relationships of the disciples were too distant for the story to be faked. Successful conspiracies require excellent communication.
And there he goes with that crazy conspiracy nonsense again. Nobody says it was a conspiracy. If anything, it was a bunch of people who really did believe these stories to be true. That doesn't make the stories true. You need a whole lot better evidence to reach that conclusion, and you don't actually happen to have any. Now, this is where I think Wallace is banking on the ignorance of his intended audience. For all I know, he might assume his followers figure the ancient Palestinians could have just jumped on Google to verify these facts or something. I don't know. I've actually run into Christians who think that mass communication was a thing in ancient Israel. All he's doing is taking massive word of mouth and assuming that because they're all telling sort of the same story, that it's all got to be real. We can prove that the same thing happens today, and it's not real. So, sorry, this isn't really how the real world works.
Everyone participating in the conspiracy needs to tell the same story, and that's hard to do unless they can communicate regularly.
Yeah, except they didn't. All we have to do is look at the Gospels to see that. Even though they had access to some of the earlier manuscripts, even though we know that Matthew and Luke copied huge swaths out of Mark, often word for word, including typos, they still got an awful lot wrong. Now, I don't know if he's going to get to this later or not, so I'll hold off, but Bart Ehrman has his students do an exercise and write down all of the story elements of the 4 Gospels concerning the death and resurrection of Jesus, and then he has them try to reconcile them all. And they can't do it. Nobody can, not unless you just make shit up out of whole cloth to cover the gaps. And that's the kind of thing that you see people like J. Warner Wallace and his ilk doing regularly. If anyone is being dishonest around here, it's them.
That's why, as detectives, the first thing we do when interviewing multiple suspects is separate them. Successful conspiracies also benefit from strong familial relationships. Conspirators are far less likely to rat out fellow family members.
Well, there's still no conspiracy, but did you ever notice that religion likes to pretend that as soon as you become a member, you're suddenly part of the family? How many times in the New Testament did someone call fellow believers brothers and sisters in Christ? And when you have a lot of people who desperately want to believe the same things, who want to be part of the same family, they're not going to go around pointing fingers at anyone else on their side. And this is why, once your beliefs become wholly emotional, you tend to stop giving a damn if any of it is actually true. And besides, how exactly did you separate these people 2,000 years ago? They were still immersed in the same culture with the same stories that had spread far and wide. You still had the Jewish religion, which believed a lot of the same things about the supposedly coming Messiah that, surprise, surprise, showed up in the stories told about Jesus. It's hard to say that you separated them when the stories that they relied on were absolutely everywhere, and even then, they still couldn't get it quite right.
The disciples didn't have the benefit of excellent communication or overarching family relationships. The 12 apostles, for example, were separated by thousands of miles without the ability to communicate with each other. They couldn't coordinate lies, quote unquote, or disprove a false claim that one of them might have recanted in a faraway land.
Which, again, there's no reason to think that they lied, other than the straw man that Wallace is trotting out here, because it's easier than having to deal with not actually having any evidence for anything. This really isn't that challenging, even though for some reason he seems to think that it is. But then again, we're not going to fall for his emotional-laden bullshit like he really desperately wishes that we would. We actually care about the truth, and it's really too bad that he doesn't.
While a few of the apostles were related, most were not. And Matthew, the writer of one of the earliest Gospels, wasn't even liked by the other disciples when he first joined the group.
And there he goes again. Prove that Matthew, the one described in the stories, is the one who actually wrote the book that bears his name. Go right ahead. This ought to be fun. Of course, he can't, and he doesn't really care because this is faith, not fact-talking. It's all he has, after all. It's why he's not a credible apologist. And come to think of it, I don't know that there is any such thing.
If the story of Jesus was faked, it would have been easily exposed given the geographic and relational distance of the disciples.
Well, that's your claim. Of course, this has the same problem where it seems Wallace doesn't understand what was going on at the time. He really has no clue what anyone was talking about out in those distant lands. We have letters that were written by the apostles to distant churches, but we really have no way of knowing what any of them might have said when they got up in front of a specific church out in some distant area. It's not like anybody was filming it on their cell phone or anything. Also, the people in those tiny little churches, it's not like they knew what was being said out in the other distant churches. They couldn't just hop on YouTube and watch a video clip. They had someone come to town. They got up and they preached in front of the group. And remember, these weren't really churches like we know today. They were very informal groups where you just got up in front of a bunch of people who were sitting around and then you told a story. And then those people, they were just gone. And there was absolutely no way to know if, at the next church 100 miles or 1,000 miles away, they were saying something completely different. There was no way to verify anything. It was all taken on faith, and faith is complete bullshit.
Number 3. The motives of the disciples were too weak for the story to be faked. Successful conspiracies are motivated conspiracies. Detectives learn quickly that there are only 3 reasons why anyone tells a lie: financial greed, sexual lust, and the pursuit of power.
And there it is again. Complete bullshit. There are tons of reasons that people can lie. People can lie to avoid embarrassment. They can lie to cover their own ass. They can lie because some people just like to lie. They like to fool people. And those are 3 reasons that I just pulled off the top of my head that prove that Wallace is a complete dumbass. This is why I'm so completely unimpressed with the idea of J. Warner Wallace as a crime scene investigator. He doesn't seem to know much about humans or human motivation. I know he supposedly won some recognition, but maybe that was before he went completely out of his mind and joined the Loony Brigade. I don't know, you tell me.
People who lie, or commit any crime for that matter, only do so for one of those 3 reasons. If the alleged eyewitnesses of the resurrection, all 500 plus of them, were lying, what was their motivation?
What makes you think there were actually that many eyewitnesses? Because somebody wrote it down in a book? Yeah, do me a favor and stay the hell away from my crime scene, because this is where he goes completely off the rails, more so than usual, because he can't stop believing that everything that his religious faith claims, it all has to be true. Because of course it does. It's all about his fee-fees. Yet he hasn't stopped to ask himself the simplest of questions. You know, how do you know that any of this stuff is actually true? Because he just doesn't give a damn. None of them do. And how sad is that?
None of them got rich from the lie. None collected girlfriends, and none even had the power to prevent their own martyrdom.
And how exactly do you know that? because after the events in the Gospels, most of the disciples entirely vanished from history. There are stories in church traditions, but that doesn't prove that any of it is actually true. We lack independent corroboration for any of it. For all you know, whoever was involved in the early church, they all went off, got laid, got rich, and lived to a ripe old age. There were plenty of early Christian sex cults after all. And maybe, down the line, the church, once it got powerful, it realized just how embarrassing that was, and it made up stories about their church founders getting martyred and being heroes. Because why not? It sounds a hell of a lot better than, yeah, Peter got herpes and died surrounded by his concubines. You actually have to prove that these stories are true. Go right ahead.
Instead, the early eyewitnesses of the resurrection only suffered for their claims. Most were martyred. Many were persecuted. Others were ostracized. Yet they held to their claims with unwavering determination, all without any motive to lie.
Says who? Because you still haven't demonstrated that any of those things are actually true in objective reality. It's traditional in the church to think that Paul was beheaded in Rome. Well, how do you prove that? Where is the independent corroboration that proves it? Where are the Roman records for the execution of Paul? Hell, where are the Roman records for the execution of Jesus? All you have are stories and absolutely nothing more. And stories are not impressive. Come back with proof.
If the story of Jesus was faked, it would have been exposed easily once the pressure was applied against a group that had little or nothing to gain. So the next time you're sharing the truth of Christianity and someone says, Jesus wasn't actually resurrected from the dead, that story was faked.
You know, that thing that nobody ever says, but hey, Wallace has to have something to con the rube, so why not just lie about it? I wonder which of his 3 reasons is driving his dishonesty. Let me know what you think down in the comments.
Remember these 3 things. Number 1.
Yeah, been there, did that. Why is it that so many Christian videos act like their viewers are complete idiots with the mental acuity of a chickpea? We don't think you can remember what happened 3 minutes ago, so here we go again. Yeah, knock it off. Anyone who can't remember can just go back and watch the video again. So anyway, what do you think? I've had a couple of similar videos suggested to me, but I don't think Wallace has much else to say on the subject, at least not that stands up to any kind of critical scrutiny. Let me know if you want me to go through those videos too, though, because, hey, I'm willing. What the hell? I'm just trying not to get too repetitive, but it's pretty hard sometimes because the religious haven't come up with a new argument for centuries and centuries and centuries, or a legitimate argument ever. This is also why so many of these apologists just don't impress me, because they just start with their conclusion, reached for emotional reasons, and then they just hope nobody calls them on it because, hey, the people they're talking to are stupid. And that's why they don't talk to us, because we won't let these things fly, and then they'll just have to slink off in shame once we point out that they've ultimately got absolutely nothing but fifis. J. Warner Wallace is complete crap. He's a crap apologist, and if these videos are anything to go by, he was a crap crime scene investigator too. Reality just doesn't work this way. You can't just blindly believe things because you want it to be true, and then base your entire position on your own wishful thinking. If you do, you're an idiot, and J. Warner Wallace is a complete idiot. Go ahead. Prove me wrong.
Bum